All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going to discuss brand and branding, what those two words mean, what the relationship is between both of them. And I'd like to get started. Before we do that, a couple housekeeping items. One, please do post your questions into the chat. We will, if we don't cover them live as I go through the material, we will definitely cover them at the end. Post them while they're top of mind, because if you don't post them right away, you're going to forget. So pop up the chat, make sure you get those questions in. Also, if you registered online to watch this webinar, you will get a copy of the slides and a recording. If you haven't registered and you're watching this on the live stream, there will be a QR code at the end that you can scan to get a copy of the slides. So don't feel like you need to be grabbing screenshots and stuff. Okay, a little bit about me. My name is Steve Robinson. I'm the founder and CEO of Brilliant Metrics. In addition to that, I teach some courses at UW Milwaukee School of Continuing Ed. I do workshops. I love teaching. This is my favorite thing to do. And I am married with 3 small children who are at school right now, so they can't interrupt this webinar. So yay. All right, a little bit about Brilliant Metrics. We are a digital first agency. We have no problem with traditional tactics. We like to try things digital first to get some data back before we roll things out in more traditional means. We're primarily B2B. And I think what sets us apart from other agencies is a focus on continuous improvement, but not just continuous improvement of marketing results. We do that, but also of people, of our team, of our clients, technology, of our clients' capabilities, knowledge, etc. It's always helping move forward and get to that next level. All right, commercials done. Let's dive into the content here. Today, I want to talk about 3 things. I want to talk about brand and branding, what those words mean, and how settle some confusion around the difference between the two of those, and then talk about the activities that we as marketers can do around brand or branding, specifically research and data gathering on one side, and activation or pushing our brand out on the other. And we'll talk at length about the relationship between those two things. So the first thing, let's define brand. Your brand is how you are perceived in the marketplace. It is not what you're putting out there. It's not your logo, your identity. It is how people, particularly your addressable market, the folks you're trying to influence, how they perceive you. And there are 3 components of your brand that you want to keep an eye on. The first one is awareness. Who knows about you? Nobody can like you or think of you or have you top of mind or come to you if they don't know who you are. So how broadly are people aware of your brand? The second is sentiment. Do they like you? Do they think you're a good company, a good organization to work with? Your brand sentiment is really important to have a handle on. And the third is brand personality. What does it feel like to work with you? We've all been to a party and left that party talking about one of the guests. Sometimes that's in a really good light, sometimes it's in a not so good light, but usually it's because that guest has a particularly strong personality. They're memorable. We know what context we would like to spend more time with that person or not. Strong personalities pull people in and push people away. That's true of humans and of brands. The stronger your brand personality, the stronger your attachment towards best fit customers and clients is going to be. And it's also going to repel those folks that aren't a good fit for you as well. So a brand personality, how you're perceived in the marketplace, through a series of positioning and character attributes is really important. So that's your brand. You don't control your brand. Now, you can influence your brand, but you don't control your brand. Your brand is controlled by your audience. You influence it through your brand expression. This is how your company expresses itself. This is how it presents itself. And here and again, there are three different core components to that expression. You have your brand voice, your choice of words, how you talk, how you communicate is one component of that. You have your visual identity. So what is the look and feel of your brand? What does it feel like to work with your brand? And then you have experience. What is the experience that your customers, your prospects, your sales channel, your vendors, your employees, what is the experience they get when they interact with your people? So brand is your perception. Branding is what you put out there, right? What is the relationship between those two things? Ideally, your branding is grounded in some research. You're out there listening to understand how well people know who you are, how they feel about you, and most importantly, from a research standpoint, what is your perceived brand personality? How do they think and feel about you? Because if you try to produce branding and branded content that isn't in close agreement, doesn't have to be perfect, can be a few degrees off, but within relative close agreement to the perception of your company in the marketplace. If you miss, it comes off as inauthentic. We've all seen this here or there where we see a commercial that just doesn't seem right for the brand that's trying to promote itself that way. It's really important that your branding is informed by the research in your brand. That also helps you know if that branding is having an impact on the other side. And that's the other half of this, and that is your branding. Through the activation of your branding, you have the opportunity to influence your brand. You have the opportunity to influence how aware people are of your brand, and you have the opportunity to influence how they perceive your brand personality. And so today I want to focus on those two things. The research side, getting the data in so that you can create authentic branding, and so you can know whether or not the activation of that authentic branding is actually having an impact. And then we'll talk about that activation itself. How do you take a well-defined brand to market? So first, the research. How do we measure brand awareness, sentiment, and personality? So let's look at awareness first. Do they know who you are? There are three methods that we have used to measure brand awareness. And the first two are standard. The third one's a little bit not quite as standard, but it's still used. The first one is an unaided awareness study. This is the gold standard. If you're running an unaided awareness study, you have a market research firm out there who is surveying a group of your addressable market and asking them an open-ended question. Who would you consider for product or service X? You notice it's an open-ended question. They're not giving your brand as one of the options. So if that person can't produce your brand name from thin air, then it's not going to come out of the study. So it's a really accurate measure of who knows you exist and relates you to your core product or service. But it's expensive. It's expensive to hire the market research firm to do it. It's expensive to process those results because they're all open-ended, which means every single result from that study has to be manually tagged. And it's hard to find that survey panel because you have to find people that are in your addressable market but aren't already customers. So they're probably not in your CRM. They're probably not also prospects because those folks are going to have a higher awareness of you than other people. You essentially need to find or your third-party research firm needs to go find a panel of people who could be customers but aren't, and survey them. And if you're in a niche industry, it's almost impossible. Works a lot easier on the B2C side. On the B2C side, we can just go survey a broad section of the population and get a pretty accurate result, provided that we maybe demographically narrow in on who your target market is. Slightly less expensive than an unaided awareness study is an aided awareness study, and this is a simple multiple choice. If you've been on YouTube before and you've seen which of the brands would you consider, and they list a series of brands and you check the ones that you would consider, that's an aided awareness study. They're trying to understand who comes to mind for a particular product or service. It's less effective than an unaided recall, but it's also less expensive because the processing the results is automatic because it's not an open text field that has to go and be parsed by a human. Both of these are hard to do in many B2B contexts and are cost prohibitive for a lot of organizations. So what we often fall back on is branded search tracking. And this is an imperfect measure of brand awareness, but by simple logic, nobody can search for your brand name plus a product name or service name or anything else that might come after it if they don't know who you are, right? I can't look for you if I don't know who you are. This works in many instances, but there are a couple of edge cases where it doesn't work. One of them is if your brand name is easily confused with another brand or another idea or something else that people would search for. This happens often if the name of your company is your product category and you weren't really creative in coming up with a name. This also doesn't work if you have frequent spikes in non-commercial search queries. So examples of that are huge recruiting pushes are going to drive up those branded search queries. Or if you're publicly traded, quarterly earnings reports or other press like that might drive that up in ways that don't apply to your target market. The people that are searching aren't the people that would buy. They're people who would come work for you, or they're financial analysts, or they're curious public or community members because some news event happened, right? That'll blow this up. So provided you don't see spikes like that in branded search traffic due to non-commercial public relations type things or recruiting, and your brand name is unique, this is a great way to keep tabs on how many people are aware of your brand out there. You should, if possible, be doing one of these three if you can. It will give you a handle on how effectively you are, or most importantly, you want to track the trend over time on this because you want to know whether or not your brand is growing or your brand is shrinking in awareness. And if it is shrinking, you're going to want to take steps to try and mediate that, right? So that's awareness. How do we measure sentiment? Well, if you go out and look online, a lot of vendors out there that will monitor brand sentiment in social. So they're looking for people tweeting or posting on Facebook publicly or in other ways talking online about your brand in either positive or negative light. You can also look at reviews, but again, most of our clients are B2B and we don't get a ton of reviews. There's not a ton of people tweeting or talking about our brand online. So our best bet is actually to look at those folks interacting with our brand and ask them what their sentiment is. And the most effective way to do that is a Net Promoter Score, NPS score. If you are a Brilliant Metrics client, the email on the right will look very familiar to you because you get these once a month. But what we ask in a Net Promoter Score is how likely are you to recommend your brand on a scale of 1 to 10. And it's been scientifically proven that this is a pretty consistently responded to question. So you're going to get some really statistically valid results if you can get enough responses. You want to track these over time. The obvious person to survey and ask is your customers. And certainly they're going to be the biggest source of word of mouth when it comes to how good it is to work with your brand. But they're not the only ones that that should be surveyed. Every once in a while, you also want to take a look at your vendors and see what your vendor feedback is from an NPS to NPS score. How likely are you to recommend somebody work with your company as a vendor? Channel partners, how likely are you to recommend our product to your customers? Employees, how likely are you to recommend to a friend that they work for this company? Your reputation, your sentiment in the marketplace is influenced by anybody who has the ability to speak highly or poorly about your brand. And that definitely includes not only your customers, but your employees, your channel partners, your vendors, and everybody else in between. So ask them, how likely are they to speak favorably of you? Or more importantly, how likely are they to recommend others engage with you in the same way that they engage with you? The next question here is, or the next area of research is in brand perception is personality. Now, when it comes to awareness and sentiment, there's pretty tried and true methods out there for being able to measure those. When it comes to personality, though, it's kind of all over the place. A lot of folks will conduct focus groups. They'll ask survey questions relating your brand to other brands or your brand to certain, big five personality traits or other things like that. We actually developed a process here that's proprietary to us, but you're more than welcome to steal it, called a brand vector process. And so the brand vector process works by setting up a series of lines. And on either end of the line is a believable extreme of a personality trait that a company could take. And then we ask survey respondents to plot your brand on this line. Where does it fit? So is it on this end of the extreme or this end of the extreme? If they put you in the middle, well, that's kind of like meh, not really an appropriate personality trait to really exemplify your brand. But if they put you on one of the ends, then it's pretty clear that this is a personality trait, a brand personality trait that applies to you. We've got a whole list of these, but be creative and come up with your own if it seems like it's going to be something that you think you're going to appear on one end of the line. So for example, let's say casual and buttoned up. Think, Dunkin' Donuts is way over here on the casual end, whereas Starbucks is pretty far over here on the buttoned up end of things. It's a brand personality trait that it's easy to imagine a company occupying one end or the other of that spectrum. And it's pretty straightforward to ask your employees, your customers, your vendors, your channel to plot you somewhere on this line. Another example might be tried and true or bleeding edge. If you're way out on the bleeding edge of content, or of your products and services, and a lot of stuff is experimental and some stuff doesn't work quite right, and you're always pushing the envelope within the industry and in thought leadership, that's going to put you way out over here versus if you're consistently, going to use only tried and true techniques, methods, products that are, battle tested, etc. You're going to be way over here. What's not a brand vector is something where one end is not a believable extreme. You wouldn't put a company there. So, stupid versus genius, right? Nobody is going to position their company as the stupidest in the industry. Everybody wants to be on the smarter end of this spectrum. So it's not a good brand vector. It doesn't position you it doesn't differentiate you from others in the industry. You might be more smarter, but that's not really quantitative, right? So you want to focus on measuring things where there's two believable extremes to get a solid signal out of this. This is our process for this, but feel free to take it and adapt it and do what you want with it. When we run a brand vector study, we're going to start by surveying the leadership team because they know where the brand ought to be different or where they think it ought to be different. We'll survey that leadership team and the marketing team usually as well and get a feedback on which brand vectors they feel the brand occupies one of the two extremes, or is definitely not in the middle, we'll say. Off of that, we'll take that subset of brand vectors, and we'll select the ones that seem to matter, at least internally, and then we'll survey those externally and see if they do actually matter. See if the market actually agrees that you occupy an extreme on that vector. We'll usually survey customers, but we'll also survey vendors, channel, and employees, because they also interact with your brand on a regular basis. And what's really important here is all of them could be talking about you in the marketplace. Somebody who would be an employee today could be a customer tomorrow, or they could be just talking about you at a cocktail party, right? You want to make sure that all of these people are talking about you the same. And so by running the survey against all of them, you get a feel for, are all of these people actually referring to your brand in the same way? Okay, so that's the research end of things. Let's talk about how we influence those different aspects. How do we influence awareness, sentiment, and personality? That comes down to activation. So when we're looking to influence awareness, we're looking to introduce ourselves, get our name out there, and then improve recall of that name. And just a name doesn't do a whole lot of good. People need to know what we do too, right? And ideally a little bit of our personality. When it comes to sentiment, well, we just want to make more people like us. Isn't that true of all of us? And then personality, here's where we want to get that alignment. We want to make sure that as many people understand us and our brand personality as possible, and that's consistent regardless of which corner of the world we're surveying, whether that's internally or our sales channel or our customer base or our vendor relationships. Everybody should be on the same page about what it feels like to work with our brand. Before you can do any of this, though, you have to stop and you have to do three things: define, document, and disseminate your branding, technically, although that makes the sentence read weird, inside the organization. So let's talk about those three, how you do those three things. It's going to be a little different depending on which of these three you're working to define, document, and disseminate. The three components you need to define, document, and disseminate are your brand voice, the words you use, the tone, how you sound in copy and in script and dialogue, your visual identity, which is your logo, your typography, your look and feel, how you're presenting yourself visually, and then your employer brand and company values, what it feels like for somebody to interact with one of your people, right? You can dictate that experience from the inside out. Let's talk about brand voice first. I'll give you a second to read these two sets of copy here. Okay, if you notice, the Michelob copy is written at a much higher reading level, somewhere around high school reading level. The Bud Light copy is written at a second grade level. The Michelob copy refers to specific facts and figures. It is exact in its tone. It is crisp and clean copy that is very specific. The Bud Light copy is loose. It is not specific to anything. It is broad. It is emotionally driven. It is not logically driven like the Michelob copy. So you can see very distinct differences in tone. You can see differences in word choice. You can see differences in vocabulary here. All of that creates two very different sets of copy that are kind of, well, they're not exactly the same thing, but they're both, hawking beers. Your goal is to figure out how to define that brand voice, define the vocabulary and word choices that you use, define the tone. What reading level do you write at? These are all things you can document so that when your brand writes something, it's written consistently, regardless who, whether that's even in marketing or sales or customer service or anyone else who's writing on behalf of your brand, that it's written the same way. Next up is visual identity. So if you look at McDonald's, Burger King, they have two radically different visual identities. They've worked very hard to maintain separate and distinct visual brands. And it's not just their logo or even their colors, which are markedly different, but it's also the way that words are displayed on a page. Like Burger King doesn't like to put words horizontal. They'll put them at angles or smush them or twist them, right? McDonald's it's going to be, pretty straightforward. Their use of space and color, it's markedly different. And they both have really strong visual identities that are documented in how you use color, how you use typography, how you use space, how you use photography. All of that stuff is documented to the nth degree within both of these brands, and you see it because it doesn't matter which agency or which document or what it is that's produced. It's visually in line with the rest of their materials. So your job is to figure out how to document that. And that's where really strong brand guidelines come in. That'll cover your tone, your voice. That'll cover your logo use, your colors, your typography, your use of space. But don't feel like you're constrained to what normally goes into a brand guidelines. Like you can download a template for brand guidelines online and it'll have all the normal stuff in there. But think about what makes you different. Think about what makes it different to read a blog post from you. What makes it different to pick up a brochure of yours? What makes it different to visit your website? And most importantly, take a look at the research you did on your brand personality. Where are you out towards the edges, and how does that translate into words and visuals, right? Make sure that you are articulating that brand personality through the words and the images you use. The next one, employer brand and company values, could be a webinar or a full day workshop in and of itself. So I'm only going to be able to touch the surface here. But to do so, I want to highlight a case study here. Obviously not our client, but the Ritz-Carlton is well known as having some of the strongest internal branding of any organization. And it translates to a really consistent guest experience if you stay at one of their properties. Their motto is, "We are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen." Think about everything that is conveyed in that. And they use that motto all over the place in their internal training. They have a motto, they have a credo, they have a series of company values, they have policies that support a very strong internal brand that support those values. They have something called a $2,000 policy. Every single associate at the Ritz-Carlton is authorized to spend up to $2,000 of the company's money to make a guest experience right, without talking to a supervisor. All of that combines to create a very consistent and a very positive brand experience for anybody interacting with Ritz-Carlton associates. So now that we've taken care of define and document, disseminating, you've got to get this information out to everyone, and you have to make sure that you're repeatedly training and introducing these documents to your organization. It should be part of employee onboarding. It should be part of your regular training. And if you're working with an outside organization, make sure your brand guidelines are transitioned along with your creative brief. Just hammer it internally. On the employer branding side, company values need to be posted prominently. You need to be talking about company values on a regular basis. Make sure that those company values support those brand personality attributes as well, and that there's alignment and agreement there. All right, you did your homework. You've documented, your brand guidelines are done. You've got a strong employer brand, and you've gotten that out there and activated it. Now we can start working on actually influencing awareness, sentiment, and personality. So there's two core paths to brand activation, to moving the needle on those three things. One is to maximize experience. That means maximizing the quantity of experiences that people have with your brand and the depth of those experiences. Obviously, it also means making sure those experiences are on brand, that they fall within those brand guidelines that you developed earlier. The second is to maximize impressions, simply getting your name out there, ideally associated with a very simple reference to your product, service, and what makes you different, will improve that brand awareness. We talk about experience. There's two different types of experiences. There's human to human, which again, strong employer brands, strong values are going to be key to maintaining a consistent human to human experience. And that's really important. That's going to impact your brand. But the other half of that is content to human. And so here you really have three mandates. One, make sure that content is on brand, that fall back on research for brand personality, fall back on your brand guidelines, make sure it is in line with the expectations of your audience or where you want to position yourself. Two, you need to drive quantity in those engagements, whether that's email, paid media, all of your standard marketing tactics. And then three, drive depth to those experiences. So create compelling video content that is going to suck people in, create utility and tools people are going to come back to time and time again, create valuable white papers or documents that people are going to immerse themselves into, and make sure all of it is strongly branded. So that's the experience. Let's talk about the impression side. So on the impression side, your goal is to simply get that brand in front of as many people as possible. And what's funny is that doesn't just improve awareness, but it actually also improves sentiment. So if you've been around Brilliant Metrics for a while, you've probably heard me talk about this because I happen to love this particular study. But they ran a study back in the 60s at University of Michigan and Michigan State. And the study involved putting nonsense words, and you'll see them on the left side of that graph, in the school newspaper, right on the front page. If anyone called the newspaper and said, why are these words here? The newspaper was instructed to respond, a generous benefactor asked us to print them, no questions asked. The reality was it was a scientific study. What they did is half the words were published at a high frequency at Michigan State, but those words were published at a low frequency at University of Michigan. The other half of the words were published at a high frequency at University of Michigan, and then a low frequency at Michigan State. After they'd run in the newspaper for a series of months over and over and over and over again, they surveyed the student population, and they didn't ask them what these words mean or if they'd seen them. They asked them, do these words mean something good or something bad? And what came out was that the words that were shown at a high frequency at a given campus consistently were rated more good or gooder. They had a better sentiment. And so what this means for you is simply getting your brand out there over and over and over and over again is going to make more people like you. as illogical as that may seem. So maximizing impressions will improve awareness, but it will also improve sentiment. And if your branding activity, if it's brand advertising, PR, whatever it might be, if it's on brand from a brand personality standpoint, it will also help aggregate people around the same brand personality vectors as well. It'll get people aligned on how they think and feel about your brand as well. So to sum it up and bring it back to the graphic here, strong branding with brand guidelines and a strong employer brand, when activated through various marketing activities, will shift and solidify your brand perception in the marketplace. A stronger brand will put you in the pole position for leads and opportunities where you are the brand of choice. It will help differentiate you in the marketplace, push away the people that shouldn't be working with you, and suck in like a magnet the people that should. Your brand should be measured and monitored for trends. That's where research comes in. The 3 areas of research are in awareness. And if you can't afford to do an awareness study, then doing a branded search may be a great fallback to measure that trend over time. The second one is sentiment, and Net Promoter Score is going to be your best bet, especially B2B, because it's hard to get sentiment signals any other way. And the third one is personality, and that's where running a brand vector study every couple of years will help you understand what your brand personality is in the marketplace. If your research is informing your branding, then your branding will be authentic and it will land. If you make your branding up because this is what the president thinks we ought to be, then you run the risk of creating inauthentic branding that will actually just stand to hurt your brand in the marketplace when you go to activate it. Before we open this for questions here, I want to share one more thing. This was this week's Marketunist post. If you aren't subscribed to Tom Fishburne's Marketunist, I go out and sign up for it. It's really great stuff. We're at a crossroads right now when it comes to artificial intelligence and its impact on marketing. If content wasn't a commodity before 2023, content will be a commodity after 2023. Right now, we're seeing that with blog content, but videos are next. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody published an AI that'll create infographics. What's going to separate your content from everybody else's will be your brand. Your brand will become increasingly more important to capture and retain attention. Content won't cut it. So with that thought, let's open this up for questions here. If you haven't gotten your questions in chat, now is the time to get your questions in chat. Jesse asks, what timeline would you define to consider something a trend in data when it comes to brand? We track brand awareness through searches on a monthly basis. If there's seasonality, it's important to look at that year over year. But I think if you're looking at branding trends over time, particularly sentiment or awareness, you can go with a frequency of monthly and still get pretty good signal, and that'll give you a good fidelity on what your actions are doing to impact your branding. Does anyone else have any questions? That was a great question, Jesse. Thank you. Okay. Well, with that, I want to thank everybody for joining me today. I do appreciate the time, and I look forward to seeing you next month. I forget what our topic is. And if you're in the Milwaukee area and have not signed up for our GA4 workshop, definitely go check that out. It's on our website under Knowledge Live Events. It's a great chance to join with a bunch of other people and make this painful transition from Universal Analytics to GA4 together. So with that, thank you. Have a wonderful day.